Welcome tonight. Going to talk about a pattern, actually, and a CSS pattern called, or I guess abbreviated as BEM, meaning B-E-M. And I bring it up and thought about talking about it because I've had it come up a couple different times in technical interviews. So I've had, I was on a third interview for a job that ended up not working out, but the guy was asking me if I'd ever heard of BEM or used BEM or understood it. And he explained it to me real quick, but I got to looking into it and saw it, and then it came up again. And I was like, wow, this isn't something that I think a lot of the quote unquote, modern people and things are talking about, but it's a pattern that a lot of people implemented in the past and still implement because it was very, very useful, and it's still around in a lot of places. And I had seen it in code and didn't know what it was, and just thought, oh, somebody that has this convention for organizing their CSS, and I didn't realize that it was an actual thing, that it had some rules and there was an actual thought process behind it more than just a singular engineer or team. So I wanted to go into BEM and what it is, and I don't think we're going to take up the whole time this evening on this hour because it isn't super complex, but I just want to show some examples and go into it and write a little bit of code. I guess Ruby isn't the right extension for this file for a little bit of code styling. And yeah, I want to go through it some, and since it is more of a pattern, chat about it, see if you guys have any questions about it, and let's discuss it some, because I think it's something that, especially on our smaller projects and things that we do as we begin, or we're doing on the side, or portfolio projects, or like personal websites, things like that. Having some hand-rolled CSS can be a good thing, and not diving deep down a rabbit hole of a CSS framework when really, we only have 10 objects on our page, or 10 elements on our pages. Maybe writing some CSS is useful, and having a way to structure it, and then seeing how that structure can be applied to larger projects would be very useful. Actually, let me make a directory as well, because I want to show how this is structured inside of a project. I don't want that there. Yeah. Move this up there. There we go. Okay. And I'll make a few other directories. Let's say there's a source directory and styles and I don't know, JavaScript. There we go. That looks a little bit more like what a project might look like. Cool. So we'll dive into that structure a little bit later. So BEM stands for Block Element Modifier. Block Element Modifier. I guess we can put these in the CSS file because we can show examples as we go. I'll just comment them out. There we go. Don't save. So I didn't even ask, but has anybody heard of this before? BEM, or Block Element Modifier?
Nope. First time.
Okay, cool.
I heard about it and wondered what it is.
Okay. I can say even knowing about it is more than I had, after a couple of years of studying off and on by myself and graduating Flatiron. So you're ahead of where I was. So let's, I'm going to start with kind of a overarching reasoning behind why people use BEM, or that I've read people use BEM. I haven't used it as of yet, but I really want to gain some exposure to the pattern of it, build something and implement it. But really, it comes to complex projects and how to organize the code in an efficient way. And it's really going to affect how long it takes to write the code, how much of the code you'll have to write, and how much loading the browser will have to do to get the code. And it also is going to affect the team dynamic and, you know, being able to, for anybody to kind of pick up the code base and know what's going on and for it to make sense. So there's actually a bunch of methodologies out there around structuring CSS and how to do that. And BEM is one of them, and BEM is a popular one of them. So really, people believe that it's one of the least confusing methodologies, but still provides a solid architecture with some recognizable terminology. So the three elements are blocks, elements, and modifiers, as I said before. And the idea is to modularize the CSS some. And I was listening actually to a podcast today, and it had someone on there who was specifically talking about CSS, and she had dived deep into CSS and how it really works and its structure, and actually said, you know, when you modularize CSS, you lose some of the benefits of it being a cascading style sheet. You want those styles to cascade, but that's neither here nor there. I thought, wow, that makes a lot of sense. Like, why would I want to do CSS that doesn't cascade? It's in the name of it. But so the first of them is the block, and this is going to be a container. And I have a little visual, and we're going to look at least one live website that uses this styling as well to kind of parse it and really dive into it some. And I don't know where that's going to take us, but we'll see. And this is something that is a container or context where other elements are going to be laid out. So it's typically, you know, class level. You can imagine blocks as bigger structural chunks of code, things like, not block. So there might just be something called a block, or header, sidebar, maybe an about, content, footer. So things like that, you know, the things that hold, or in our layout. Yeah, container. Although container is sometimes like the whole page, and that might be a little bit more overarching than what a block is. But yeah, container, block, I think it would depend on how the container is being used. But yeah, I think container still is something to put other stuff inside of, you know? So, but the most important thing to remember about this pattern is that the block is an independent entity. So it can exist or stand on its own. So one block can be a part of another block. We can nest the blocks, but the block contains all of the subsequent elements. So the block should be our top level piece of CSS. So the next part is an element. And let me ask you guys, because I haven't gone over this topic before, so I don't know how it's going to be best understood. Do you think if I do element and modifier and show some of these examples like this and talk about it a little bit and then look at a graphical image like a JPEG that has some things pointed out, it's easier to understand, or the other way around? Or should I try and just fit it both on this screen, which is possible. I could probably fit it both on this screen.
Could work either way. That's not helpful. Maybe both on the same screen?
Yeah, I'll see how that looks.
Oh.
And there, that works. It's kind of a reference point. And we're seeing blocks and such. But kind of looking at a reference of things. I have better, actually, Guardian's website uses BEM, so we're going to look at how they use it in a bit, because they have lots of stuff going on. Yeah. I thought about building a template, and I was like, man, I'm going to write all this stuff to show like 3 things. I bet some websites out there in production are using it, and it'll probably be more beneficial than, you know, a skeleton that I'd write. So yeah, we'll look at Guardian and explore it together. I know that they use it, and I looked at it a little bit, but I haven't spent much time searching through it. So yeah, we'll look at it together. So the element is part of a block and is going to be there, be in that block to perform some sort of function. So and function in not like the Ruby or the JavaScript type of function, but, you know, the function of something in CSS. So elements cannot exist on their own in the way to keep their function or meaning. So they can only appear inside the blocks. However, they're also not a necessity. You can have one or more elements nested inside the block or not. It's just a matter of the situation that we're in. And so an example of an element could be an input field. You know, this is the auth block, and, you know, that's an element, and that's an element, and the button's an element. And, you know, we see the search block, and we have input field and search button. So now we're going to talk a little bit about how we use and how we present these elements in our CSS. And this is where BEM starts coming in a little bit more. So the first symbol for an element is going to be, well, there's a pair of elements, or not a pair of elements. There's a pair of things that we want to represent with our element. So we want to be able to say our block. So let's say we had, you know, search block and our button. So we have a block and or our input. So we have, you know, search block and input element. So the first of that pair, let's say, I'm just going to move this one down. You know, we're in the header block. Let's just say, you know, this image is our header block. So we'll present our header. We'll have our block for our element. And then after that, we're going to use an underscore to delineate. However, we always use a double underscore in BEM. And that's when we want to add the element to a block. So here, we might have header, I guess search input. I guess that would be more appropriate, looking at how these things are tagged, because we have a search block. So we have the search, and then I guess search, yeah, because we could have a header block, and then the search block is inside of that. So we have the search block with an input element. So whenever we're adding an element into a block, the class naming notation will follow this fashion. We'll have the name of the block, followed by 2 underscores, and then the name of the element. Block element. And then CSS. I guess this is yellow because, yeah, there's nothing in there. I wonder if, no. Okay. So we could have also, let's say, search button. If we had some other things, we could have header, let's say header, navigation, or like main content type of thing. Let's do one more. Footer. Let's say what's in footers? Like disclaimer. So it may look a little strange having those 2 underscores. However, it's also very, very simple and straightforward. And I think, you know, it delineates well and we understand. One thing to remember is to keep the class name simple, clear, and precise, especially since we're chaining things together. And really just keeping it dry. You know, don't repeat yourself. We want our classes to be both semantic, as in descriptive, and also universal, so we can use them multiple times. And that just comes with time and with building things, because we'll see, you know, we know certain things, like we know what a header and footer and such, but naming things well does take time. And there's a reason that, you know, there's a lot of names that are out there and that people follow certain naming schemas because they're clear and make sense, and have been figured out over time for sure. Okay. Lastly, we have our modifier. And these are the properties of blocks or elements. So we want to keep our classes repeatable so we don't have to create new classes in other parts of our sites and our projects. So when the element styles are the same, or we don't want to create new styles when we don't want to create new classes when styles are the same in other places. So if, you know, we have a search input or, you know, something like that, and we have another search somewhere else in our site, we want to be able to reuse it again. And remembering this is CSS, this is all styling that we're looking at. So and our modifiers are going to help with this. So in a situation where we want to change the style of some specific element, we'll use a modifier to do it while keeping the block and element classes untouched. So this will include changing visual styles, behavior, and such. So now we get another symbol in our CSS that we're going to use, and in this case, it's going to be a hyphen. So in the case of blocks and elements, we added 2 underscores. And then when we want to create or use a modifier, we'll use 2 hyphens. So our naming style is going to be block element modifier. or block modifier. So block or element name, 2 hyphens, and the name of the modifier. So we can also have element modifier as well. So the modifier can be attached to the block, to the element, to the block element, or just to the element. So we're not using any CSS selectors at all. These are all classes that we're going to attach to our code. And we'll see how it kind of connects together in just a minute. Yeah, this is just syntax of how, because this really ultimately all that BEM is a naming convention of how to name things and what things we consider blocks, elements, and modifiers. And then saying, okay, I'm going to stick to these rules where a block is, you know, something that's freestanding that I put other things inside of. An element is a piece of something inside of a block. And the modifier is when, you know, I might have this button here and I might have a button element, you know, type of thing. And when I want to change its color, I'm going to throw a modifier on there. This naming translates well to like inline and block elements. Yeah, I would think so. But yeah, we'll get there. Let's keep it moving. We'll keep moving along, and it might become clearer as we look at the code. Yeah, no reason to apologize. I like it when people ask questions. Sometimes study groups are completely silent, and I forget that people are there. So I love the interruptions and the interaction. I'm not the type to force it so much. I know some others are like, we'll call people out by name. That's not my style, but so thanks. So in contrast to blocks and elements, modifiers are not restricted in the sense of how many of them we might use on one element. So we'll use as many as we want, depending on what we want, need, or you know what our project recommends. In BEM, modifiers are going to exist to help us modify the elements by creating reusable styling classes, quote unquote. And those are applicable across the whole website or project, not just one section. So we could say like text red or text blue, you know, or icon alert or icon message. Types of things. So let's look at, we'll write a little bit of HTML. And then new file. Then we'll look at the site. So let's say we have like our nav. We might have, you know, our header, and then inside our header we'll have nav, role of navigation, inside our nav, might have, you know, a list of some things, but a class with header, nav, primary, header, nav, right. We'll throw this into the background for now. Inside there, we got some list items, you know, our nav links. A class equals link default text medium ref equals, I'll just throw a hash in there so it doesn't yell. And let's say that, you know, 5 links. So we have home, what else? About. That's 4 links. That's fine. Home, about, say portfolio, put contact as last. Maybe there's, you know, a GitHub link on there. This looks like something that might be, you know, maybe the nav for, you know, portfolio website or something. And then maybe our contact page isn't done just yet. So let's make that link disabled. So now we see a little bit more about how the example or how BEM is going to be used. So we have role. I think it might have something to do with accessibility. I can't always remember exactly. Like the header could have a role too, I think. But I don't think it has to have a role. But I think the browsers interpret that stuff and do stuff with it. So we see that we have our block, the header, and then we have our element, the nav, and then we have 2 modifiers. So we're calling this primary and right. And then we have our link styling. So, you know, we have link default, looking very similar to, you know, something like, oh, I thought I did this earlier. I was in a different text editor. Link default, you know, very similar to how some other, you know, CSS frameworks do styling. Then we could have a size. So, you know, we set the size in our CSS and we can use text medium wherever we want. And we know that it's, you know, the text element, and then it has a modifier of medium. And then we have a link element, and the modifier is going to be disabling it, however we choose to do that in styling. So this is kind of a mock-up of what this something could look like. Let me see if I have anything else in my notes that I really think is worth looking at or worth mentioning. Some benefits being modularity, reusability, structure, I think, which we're seeing. We can, you know, use these CSS classes wherever we want, and they make sense. They're very structured. They're modular. We can pick them out and put them where we want. Obviously, some things are going to be a little bit more specific, like our header, nav, primary. But if we changed something or had another header somewhere with different styling, that would make a lot of sense as well. So now let's look at some BEM in action. Like I said, I know they use it. I haven't dove too deep into it. So if there's anything that you want to look at specifically on the page, let me know and we'll open it up and we'll see. Huh, that's kind of cool. I wonder if I can get that to say Guardian. They're apparently hiring people. That's one way to get developers' attention, right? I wonder if it's, let's see, source. Will it show there? There. That's kind of cool. I didn't even know that was there because I didn't open the header before. I was just looking in here with the inspect. So either way, let's get back to looking at what we're here for. So yeah, let's run the body. Let's find something on the page. Banner header. I guess I probably have a bunch of stuff blocked. Maybe not. Is this blocking anything right now? It says it is. How do I turn it off? I used to be able to turn it off. Okay, either way, I'm pretty sure there's a big banner ad up here that we don't see, which is why this looks the way it does. Banner and header. So here's some of our BEM in action. We can see that we have, you know, the style.
Excuse me, Seth, can you make it a little bit larger? It's really
Yeah.
awesome. Great.
And I wonder. Oh, I don't want that. There. Since we're looking at the top, and then we can slide this over a little bit. Oh, there's like a sticky header up there. Banner. Okay. That's not a good example, only because it's invisible right now. But we can still see the CSS here. So there is an element called add slot. And there you see that also with the usage of the double underscore or the double hyphen, you can hyphen space the words. So, you know, all of our examples that I'd written only had one word. But if you were to write something short like add slot, you have your 1 dash, and then you have your your 2 hyphens, and then top banner add desktop. And they have some nuts in here. Add slot, top banner add desktop. Let's see, I saw some underscores earlier when I was looking. Yeah, here we go. So looking at the nav, we see a lot of it going on. So we have the full nav. So we have the class nav header, and then we have an inner on there, inner element. Then we have the nav header. Then we have the addition element or addition container. Let's see, what else we got going on in here? Anything jumping out to you guys? Any gals? Here we have a full BEM item top bar, or let's see, I'm losing. Top bar block. It's an item element. Top bar block, item element, drop down modifier. And we see not everything is following the naming convention, but JS Edition picker trigger. And we see how some of this stuff is being used. Top bar, item, top bar item, call to action modifier, which is probably doing that red right there. That's probably the call to action modifier. Let's see if we can figure that one out. Yeah, they do have a lot going on. We're not even past, you know, the nav. When you break all this down, there's a circle, and there's a text. Let's see, where were we? Here. Top bar item, call to action. Top bar item, font family. Cursor, text decoration. I don't know what all these things do. Text rendering, optimized legibility. You can learn a lot by just reading the source. Okay. It's the idea that a single hyphen or underscore kind of details itself, and that two denotes a new element within it. I think the single hyphen, they're using between words. So they're not snake casing or camel casing. They're just using that between words. And then, yeah, the double underscore would definitely be following BEM. So being, you know, and this could have changed over time, and it might be some CSS that we're not seeing. It might be in here. Like we see top bar item. So there should be, there's probably another class called top bar in here somewhere that they're using. Let's see. Oh, okay. Well, I guess it's going to find all of them. 1 of 11. There's the next one. 2. Top bar item, top bar item. New header, element top bar. Top bar item, call to action, and they have a modifier on the modifier. That's different. Call to action with a circle, call to action text. Display. And we see inherited from top bar item call to action. Then inherited from top bar item. So there's some of the cascading going on. But they are keeping to it for the most part. New header, user account container. I guess there was an old header somewhere before they changed it. So yeah, that's pretty cool seeing how they use it. I would have never thought about this modifier on a modifier, but it does make sense. You know, this call to action has 2 elements that they're working with. They have text and then they have this circle, and they want to do different things with it. I was really hoping that they were doing something with CSS to make it red, but it looks like that is, it might be JavaScript that they're using for that. They are making it grow, I believe. With this transform, ease out. But yeah, so that's BEM. The block element modifier. convention and how it works. And yeah, we went over some examples of blocks, some examples of elements, some examples of modifiers, very much in how we're organizing things, not specifically saying, that there are specific CSS things that should be in each one. We could have a block and, text, or just, background color, all these colors, dark orange. And that by no means that we might not have a background color for an element somewhere else, or in a modifier even. Is it? I can't ever remember. Red. My CSS. Sweet, let's look at this. Just found this CodePen example of how BEM code works.
They're using ampersands
Oh, I see.
in the CSS part.
So nesting it that way.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting.
Yeah. I was looking at a few different places, including there's an official BEM website, as I guess everything has these days. And they didn't make any mention of this, but this makes sense so that this kind of preserves. I was saying earlier, I was listening to, coding podcasts, and the interviewee was talking about that, part of CSS is the cascading effect, and knowing that and using that to your benefit, because, it's a feature of CSS. It shouldn't be avoided like the plague. It should be embraced and understood and used. And when used well, makes it, powerful. So I was thinking, separating everything so modularly kind of gets rid of that. But this is a way of kind of structuring with BEM, but also keeping that CSS, although this is SCSS. So I guess this would technically be compiled down to those separate classes in the end. Let's see. There we go. Let's see what this turns into. Compile. Yeah, so it does turn into those classes in the end. But it is a cool way to work it out.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, by kind of mixing two things together. So using SAS or SCSS as your structuring, as a tool for structuring, and then using BEM as a convention for naming to keep things organized in two different ways. Because I think this nested styling code is one of the biggest reasons that people use things like less or SAS, even if they don't use any of the other features, any of the imports or any of the variables or any of the mix-ins or functions, like just being able to nest CSS like this. And then, it compiles down to what you need, and then you use it that way is a great way to organize things in and of itself. And then having a naming system on top of that is awesome. Oh, the one other thing that I wanted to show was structuring a project, and because we wouldn't just have one CSS file, we might have like 500 in the end. I had a reference for that. Where did it go? Oh. Where'd it go? Where'd it go? Where'd it go? I thought it was so useful. Oh, I think it's over here. Okay, here we go. Okay, so like, let's say we have styles, and we could have a folder system of, we could say blocks, and in our blocks we could have, like, we have our input block, or input. This is how somebody suggested file system organization of a BEM project, and I don't know, I guess it kind of makes sense, but I think it might also really just depend on how broken down you want to get. Like big, and then inside of here, you could put your input box big dot SCSS, or CSS file, and then here you would put your input box dot CSS. I'll open that back up. I heard somebody take a screenshot. And then we could have like another block, which is button. And inside button could be, big, just the modifier. And you could have button big file. I'm going to close these just because blowing up the editor, the file tree. So that is a folder structure that I read about in an article about how to keep things organized. Organizing CSS files is something, and SCSS files, SAS files, LESS files, whatever style files you might have, is something that is very important because, I've worked on projects that have hundreds of CSS files because if you put them all in one file together, you get, it's really, really hard to keep track of. So you want to split things out. So this is a great way, I think, that you could style things or could organize things, even though it's one, pretty much one file inside each folder. Okay, I'm going to a block, and which block am I going to? I think button's supposed to be inside of that folder, so that there's two blocks in there. So, we have an input block and we have a button block, and then we can just work our way to whatever we're looking for. And they're really only going to be 3 levels deep, maybe 4. We saw a modifier on a modifier at Guardian's website. So they're not going to be that deep, but it is, the more that I think about this, pretty intuitive way of sorting things, even if it seems kind of odd the first time you build it, because you're going 3 levels deep for one file. That's probably going to be 10, 5, 15 lines long type of thing. But yeah, so we looked at the syntax of block element modifier. We looked at a little bit of code, just stubbed out an example how to kind of organize some code in our styles folder to keep our files in the end in our style files organized. We looked at a combination, which was pretty cool, which I guess wouldn't work for this format. If I can get back to it, Firefox, which is using BEM conventions in SCSS to nest things. And then when they get compiled, these are the classes that we would be able to use in our HTML code. Checked out the Guardian's website and found out they're hiring with this ASCII art in their header, which is pretty neat. And I'm definitely going to share with people. I'm guessing it won't be there forever. And yeah, so any final questions? We're coming up on the end of the session this evening. And what exactly were you asking was BEM? BEM is, I want to make sure I get that question answered, Derek. Yeah, so what we were learning is BEM, and BEM is not any of the code, not any of this CSS, the background or anything. It's all about the naming. So this block, having blocks and what they're defined as, having elements and how we tack elements onto blocks with a double underscore, then having modifiers and how we tack modifiers onto blocks or elements or block elements with the double hyphen. Block element modifier. Yep, that's what BEM is an acronym for and what it stands for. And the compiler, yeah, that was just, I was wondering, I was pretty sure this was not just raw CSS. That was, you see up here it's saying SCSS, and that's taking some SCSS and compiling it down to CSS. Because by default, CSS is the only thing that'll run in the browser. So no matter how we write it, whether we use SCSS, whether we use Sass, whether we use less, and we have something that allows us to write some things that aren't true CSS, like CSS doesn't have this, I believe, that little and doesn't let you nest your selectors inside of other selectors, or your classes and your styles inside of other styles. It always, in the end, turns into raw CSS because that's all that the browser can use.
I have a question. How would we start a project using BEM? Would we kind of sketch it? It sounds like you'd really have to sketch it out ahead of time and do some thinking about your names and organization structure. Is that right?
I think you could just, you start with, you just start, you start writing your HTML and you say, okay, well, here is, my header or my nav, and I know that's going to be a block that contains other things. So and really just try and stick to the convention as you're writing styles. And that will kind of lead you down the path. And it's a learning process. So I know the first time I choose to write something and use this convention, I'm going to do it wrong. And I'm going to have to go back and I'm going to learn a lot of things about, oh, this is how I really wanted to do this. And this is going to be better. And I'm going to have to, do a find all and replace all and some things on some code inside the project. And, luckily we have some tools that are useful that, we can do a find and replace all in a project and, take something that might be like this and turn it into, something different because we realize, oh, that's not named well, and we can do those types of things and change stuff around. But really, it's trying to stick to this right here, the naming convention, and just going from there.
Thanks.
Yeah, so, oh, I didn't mean to hit that just yet. I lost my, So yeah, thank you very much for coming out